a sucker for a good smile. You know, we've done a lot together at this point.
Paul Walker's 2013 crash shocked millions, but a decade later, investigations and lawsuits reveal unsettling truths about the tragedy, facts that challenge the simple accident story the world first heard. The day of the crash. Saturday, November 30, 2013, began as a celebration. In Santa Clarita, California, the air was crisp, the streets were calm, and a modest industrial park had been transformed into a gathering place for car enthusiasts. Paul Walker, the 40-year-old star of the Fast and Furious franchise, wasn't on a film set or in the middle of a high-speed chase. He was at a charity event, the kind of grassroots fundraiser he preferred to big Hollywood galas. The event was hosted by Reach Out Worldwide, ROW, the nonprofit Walker founded after the 2010 Haiti earthquake to deliver rapid disaster relief. Car lovers, families, and fellow actors had gathered to raise money for victims of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. There were food stands, raffle tickets, and a lineup of exotic vehicles gleaming under the winter sun. Among those cars was a rare Porsche Carrera GT, a low-slung 605 horsepower supercar with a reputation for being as dangerous as it was beautiful. It belonged to Roger Rodas, a professional racer, financial advisor, and close friend of Walker's. The two men had bonded over cars years earlier and often swapped stories and track time. Rodas had brought the Porsche to the event partly to show it off, partly to enjoy a quick drive. At around 3:20 p.m., Walker and Rodas decided to take the Porsche out for a short spin. Witnesses recall Walker smiling, posing for a few last photos with fans before slipping into the passenger seat. Rodas climbed behind the wheel. The V10 engine roared to life, a deep, throaty sound that made heads turn. The car rolled out of the parking lot and onto Hercules Street. The drive was supposed to be brief. Less than a mile away, Hercules curves gently to the right, bordered by trees and light poles. People near the event site heard the unmistakable growl of the Porsche accelerating. Seconds later came the sound that would mark the end of two lives, a deafening crash, followed by the boom of an explosion. A plume of thick black smoke rose above the rooftops. Several attendees sprinted toward the source. The Porsche had struck a concrete light pole and a pair of trees with such force that it split in half. The rear end lay mangled, the front engulfed in flames. Witnesses tried to get close, but the heat was intense. The fire, fed by the car's fuel, was unrelenting. When emergency responders arrived minutes later, the fire department worked quickly to extinguish the blaze. It was too late. Both men were pronounced dead at the scene. In less than 60 seconds, a day meant for charity and community had turned into a scene of horror. News spread almost instantly, first among the car community, then across social media, and finally through major outlets. For fans who had watched Paul Walker spend more than a decade on screen, often behind the wheel, the irony was gut-wrenching. And for investigators, it was the start of a case that would draw intense scrutiny, public speculation, and eventually multiple lawsuits. When investigators began piecing together the final moments of Paul Walker and Roger Rodas, they approached it like any high-profile fatal collision. Treat the scene as both a tragedy and a puzzle. Every tire mark, shard of debris, and witness account had to be examined to reconstruct what happened between the moment the Porsche Carrera GT left the charity event and the instant it struck the tree. At approximately 3:20 p.m., when Walker and Rodas left the Reach Out Worldwide fundraiser in Valencia's Rye Canyon Business Park. Hercules Street, just outside the event, is a relatively wide, lightly trafficked stretch, but it isn't a racetrack. The posted speed limit was 45 miles per hour. Long, open lanes can be tempting for performance cars, yet the road contains curves, light poles, and patches of uneven pavement. Witnesses later told investigators they heard the Porsche's 5.7-liter V10 engine rev loudly as it accelerated away. The Carrera GT, capable of reaching 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds, delivers an explosive burst of speed and those who saw it leave described it as pulling hard within seconds of departure. According to the California Highway Patrol's official collision reconstruction, the Porsche was traveling at an estimated 80 to 93 miles per hour as it approached a gentle right-hand bend on Hercules Street. The curve itself isn't severe, but at nearly double the posted limit, the margin for error is razor thin. Investigators determined the car veered slightly left before the driver attempted to correct. At that speed, even a small steering input can upset the balance of a mid-engine supercar, especially one without electronic stability control. The 2005 Carrera GT was built without that safety system, meaning that once the tires lost grip, regaining control would have depended entirely on the driver's skill and the available road space. The CHP found no evidence of drag racing with another vehicle. They also noted the absence of traditional straight-line skid marks, something conspiracy theorists later seized upon. But for crash experts, this was consistent with a high-speed yaw or sideways slide, where tires leave curved scuff marks rather than long braking streaks. The front right of the Porsche struck a concrete light pole first, generating massive deceleration forces. The car then spun, and its left side impacted two trees in quick succession. The violence of the collision caused the carbon fiber chassis to fracture, splitting the vehicle into two main sections, the rear assembly with the engine and the front cabin where Walker and Rhoda sat. Debris was scattered across the road and the fuel system ruptured almost instantly. A fire erupted within moments, producing the flash seen on a nearby security camera. Witnesses described two distinct sounds: the initial impact and just after, the ignition of the fireball. Several people from the charity event ran toward the wreckage within seconds. They were met by intense heat and flames that made any rescue attempt impossible. The fire was so fierce that by the time Los Angeles County firefighters arrived, the entire front section of the car was engulfed. Both men were pronounced dead at the scene. Once the blaze was extinguished, investigators began detailed scene documentation, measuring scrape patterns, marking debris locations, and photographing the wreck from multiple angles. Fragments of the car, including pieces of the tires, were collected for analysis. The tires' date codes revealed they were approximately 9 years old. While still showing legal tread depth, rubber hardens with age, potentially reducing grip, especially under the extreme loads of high-speed cornering. The Porsche Carrera GT's onboard systems offered only limited diagnostic data. Unlike many newer vehicles, it was not equipped with a modern event data recorder that stores full pre-crash telemetry. As a result, speed estimates were based on physical evidence and engineering calculations rather than a digital black box. The CHP's final report concluded that unsafe speed was the primary cause of the collision. They found no evidence of sudden mechanical failure in the engine, steering, or suspension that would have directly caused the crash. However, they noted contributing factors, including the car's lack of stability control and the possible effects of aged tires on traction. The official summary described the Porsche as a vehicle with limited margins for error at high speeds, especially outside a racetrack environment. In combination with the speed at which it was traveling, those margins vanished entirely in the moments before impact. By the time the wreckage was cleared that evening, the official picture was set. A rare, high-performance car, traveling at nearly twice the speed limit, lost control on a public road and struck fixed objects with fatal consequences. Yet even as investigators closed their case, questions over design, crashworthiness, and the car's behavior at the moment of impact would fuel lawsuits and keep the tragedy in the headlines for years to come. The morning after the crash, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office began the process of confirming identities and determining the precise causes of death. Autopsy and forensic findings. While the scene photographs and witness accounts had already made the outcome clear, the forensic process would provide the factual foundation for both the official investigation and the legal battles that would follow. Because of the severity of the fire, visual identification alone was not possible. Dental records were used to confirm the identities of both men, Roger Rodas, 38, and Paul Walker, 40. This step was crucial not only for the investigation, but also for legal proceedings, death certificates, insurance claims, and any wrongful death suits that require absolute confirmation. The autopsy report on Paul Walker concluded that he died from a combination of traumatic and thermal injuries. This means the blunt force trauma from the collision and the burns from the subsequent fire were both fatal factors. Traumatic injuries. These included fractures to the jaw, collarbone, arms, ribs, pelvis, and spine. The impact forces were so great that multiple skeletal systems were affected. The fire engulfed the cabin almost immediately after the collision, and burn patterns indicated exposure to intense flames. The coroner determined that Walker was alive at the time the fire started, as soot was found in his trachea, evidence that he had inhaled smoke. Toxicology tests came back negative for alcohol or illicit drugs, confirming that impairment played no role. At the time of his death, Walker was wearing a seatbelt positioned in the passenger seat. Rodas's autopsy determined that he died from multiple traumatic injuries sustained at the moment of impact. His injuries were severe enough that the coroner concluded death occurred almost instantly before the fire could cause significant burns. Like Walker, Rodas's toxicology screening was negative for alcohol and drugs. He was confirmed to be the driver through injury patterns and seat positioning. Investigators also noted that the driver's seatbelt showed clear signs of load from the collision, consistent with his being behind the wheel. One of the most closely scrutinized elements of the autopsies, and later the lawsuits, was the seatbelt system in the Carrera GT. Meta Walker's attorneys would later argue that the seatbelt's anchor point and retractor design caused it to jam under crash forces, allegedly trapping Paul Walker in the passenger seat as the fire spread. The coroner's report did not make a judgment on seatbelt performance beyond noting that Walker was restrained at the time of the crash. However, photographs taken at the scene showed the belt still latched across his body. Porsche and independent experts countered the lawsuit claims, arguing that the forces involved in the impact were unsurvivable regardless of seatbelt function. The forensic findings suggested a difference in the sequence of deaths. Rodas likely died instantly from the impact, while Walker survived the initial collision but succumbed within seconds to a combination of trauma and fire. This timeline became a key point in the wrongful death lawsuit, as Meta Walker's legal team claimed her father could have escaped had the seatbelt design been different. The official report, however, made no determination on survivability beyond stating the medical causes of death. When the coroner's findings were released in January 2014, they sparked renewed media coverage. The detail that Walker was alive after the crash, even briefly, was especially difficult for fans to process. Some interpreted it as evidence of a preventable death, while others saw it as a tragic inevitability given the violence of the crash. In the court of public opinion, the autopsy fed both grief and speculation. But in the court of law, it became a central piece of evidence, one that would be revisited, reinterpreted, and contested as lawsuits against Porsche unfolded over the next several years. When Paul Walker and Roger Rodas lost their lives in a fiery crash, the immediate question wasn't just how it happened, but why. Details of the investigation. The California Highway Patrol, CHP, and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department launched a joint investigation that would last months, involving forensic vehicle experts, crash reconstructionists, and engineers. It was a meticulous process that sought to strip away rumor and reach a definitive cause. First responders had two overlapping priorities: extinguish the intense fire engulfing the Porsche Carrera GT and preserve the crash site for evidence. Deputies quickly noted that the car had struck a light pole and two trees along Hercules Street in Valencia, California, just a few hundred yards from the site of a Reach Out worldwide charity event. Photographs taken that day would later become critical for investigators. They showed deep yaw marks, curving tire marks from a skidding vehicle beginning in the right-hand lane, veering toward the curb before impact. That pattern hinted early on that speed and loss of control were major factors. The CHP brought in its Multidisciplinary Accident Investigation Team, MAT, a unit specializing in reconstructing serious and high-profile crashes. MAT investigators follow a structured protocol, which is to measure and document every physical mark on the roadway, analyze yaw and skid marks to calculate entry speed, inspect the wreckage for mechanical defects, fluid leaks, or failures, test environmental conditions such as road surface, lighting, and weather, consult with the manufacturer for known model-specific issues. In Walker's case, they also had to work around the fact that the Carrera GT had been almost completely destroyed by fire, making mechanical inspection especially challenging. One of the first concrete findings came from analyzing the yaw marks and impact damage. The CHP's math, which factored in the radius of the tire marks, the coefficient of friction of the asphalt, and the distance traveled, placed the car's speed at between 80 and 93 miles per hour at the time control was lost. The posted limit on Hercules Street was 45 miles per hour. The Porsche hit the curb at high speed, spinning slightly before the passenger side struck a tree. The side impact was catastrophic, instantly compromising the structure of the car and rupturing the fuel system. Seconds later, a fire engulfed the wreck. Perhaps the most damning non-speed factor was the tires. All 4 Michelin Pilot Sport tires were the originals from 2005, making them 9 years old at the time of the crash. While the tread depth was still within usable limits, CHP investigators cited the age-related hardening of the rubber as a likely contributor to reduced grip. High-performance cars like the Carrera GT are particularly sensitive to tire condition. Even small reductions in traction can have dramatic effects at high speed, especially on a street not designed for racing. The Carrera GT's remains were examined in detail at a secure CHP facility. Despite fire damage, investigators were able to determine that the braking system was functional before impact. The steering system showed no sign of pre-impact failure. The suspension components were intact. There was no evidence of an engine or transmission malfunction. In other words, there was no sudden mechanical defect that caused the crash. This finding would later become central to Porsche's defense in multiple lawsuits. Hercules Street is a short industrial area loop with wide lanes but no shoulders, lined with light poles and trees. On the day of the crash, the weather was clear and dry. CHP measured the road surface's coefficient of friction and found it consistent with other Southern California asphalt surfaces. No oil, debris, or loose gravel was present. This eliminated environmental hazards as a primary cause. As with any high-profile crash involving an exotic car, the manufacturer was contacted. Porsche sent engineers to inspect the remains and review the CHP's findings. In their independent assessment, the company agreed there was no sign of a mechanical failure. They also emphasized that the Carrera GT was a race-bred supercar with limited electronic driver aids. It had no stability control and minimal traction control, meaning it demanded expert handling. Porsche pointed out that in Motor Trend tests, the Carrera GT could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just over 3 seconds and reach over 200 miles per hour, but also that it was known in the enthusiast community for being unforgiving at the limit. By March 2014, the CHP and Sheriff's Department released their official joint report. The cause of the collision was unsafe speed for the roadway conditions. No mechanical failure or roadway condition was found to have contributed. They pinned the speed at 93 miles per hour, blamed the loss of control on excessive speed combined with the aged tires, and ruled out any foul play or external interference. Despite the official conclusion, Paul Walker's daughter Meadow and Roger Rodas' widow Christine hired private investigators and accident reconstructionists to review the evidence. These experts challenged several aspects of the CHP's findings. Some argued the yaw mark analysis could be skewed because of post-impact fire damage to the tires. Others suggested that certain mechanical components, particularly in the steering system, could have failed in a way undetectable after the fire. Meadows' legal team claimed Porsche knew the Carrera GT had a history of instability at high speed and a fuel system vulnerable to rupture. These disputes set the stage for years of litigation, much of it hinging on whether the crash was purely driver error or partly due to vehicle design. When the speed figures and tire age were made public, they sparked a heated debate among fans and automotive journalists. Some felt the report unfairly implied reckless behavior without accounting for possible evasive maneuvers. Others argued that driving a high-powered supercar at nearly twice the speed limit on a public street was inherently risky, regardless of mechanical condition. The absence of mechanical failure also frustrated those hoping for an explanation beyond human error. For Walker's family and Rotus's loved ones, it meant that blame, in the official record, rested squarely on the driver and conditions. In sum, the official investigation concluded that Paul Walker's death was the result of excessive speed in a high-performance car with aged tires, not a hidden defect or sabotage. But the controversy didn't end there. It shifted to the courtroom, where Porsche's design decisions would be put on trial. Paul Walker's death didn't just leave a hole in Hollywood, it triggered a chain of lawsuits that would stretch over years, pitting his family against one of the most respected names in automotive engineering. The core question wasn't just how he died, but who, if anyone, should be held responsible. The lawsuits against Porsche. The first major lawsuit came in 2014 from Christine Rotus, widow of driver Roger Rotus. She sued Porsche Cars North America, alleging that defects in the Carrera GT, including a faulty suspension system and inadequate crash protection, caused her husband's death. Christine's claim was that Roger was not speeding, but that a failure in the vehicle's suspension caused it to veer out of control. She also argued that the car lacked critical safety features that could have saved both men, such as a stability control system standard on most high-performance cars of the era, a reinforced fuel cell to prevent post-crash fires, side door reinforcements to improve crash survivability. Porsche responded with a forceful denial. Their engineers insisted the car was in perfect working order before the crash and that the only cause was excessive speed for the conditions. In 2016, a federal judge sided with Porsche, dismissing Christine Rotus' lawsuit, citing a lack of evidence for mechanical failure. The more high-profile legal battle began in September 2015, when Paul Walker's daughter, Meadow Rain Walker, then 16, filed her own wrongful death lawsuit against Porsche. Her complaint accused the company of designing a car that was inherently dangerous and lacking safety equipment that could have prevented her father's death. Meadows' legal team built their case around several key claims, which included a defective seatbelt design, alleging that the seatbelt's anchor placement caused it to jam after impact, trapping Paul in the passenger seat. Lack of crash survival features, pointing to the absence of an electronic stability control system, crash cage, and energy-absorbing fuel lines. Known risks, claiming Porsche had long been aware of the Carrera GT's history of instability and control issues, but still marketed it as a road-legal car. The lawsuit also directly challenged CHP's finding that speed was the main cause. Meadows' lawyers argued that while the car was traveling fast, it wasn't so fast that a well-designed supercar should have been unrecoverable in that curve. Porsche's reply left no room for compromise. They stated bluntly that Paul Walker knowingly and voluntarily assumed all risk by riding in the Carrera GT. The car was misused and improperly maintained by its owners, pointing again to the 9-year-old tires. Speed, not a design flaw, was the sole cause of the crash, and that Paul was a knowledgeable and sophisticated user of the product. The company also brought up an important legal point. California law limits automaker liability in cases where a vehicle meets federal safety standards at the time of manufacture. The Carrera GT, produced in 2004, complied with all applicable regulations. In April 2017, the case took an unexpected turn. Court records showed that Meadow Walker and Porsche reached a confidential settlement. The terms were never made public, but TMZ reported that both sides agreed to keep financial details sealed. For Meadow, the resolution ended years of legal battles, but the settlement's secrecy meant the public would never get a definitive ruling on whether Porsche bore any legal blame. The legal fallout didn't stop with Meadow. Separate wrongful death claims and insurance disputes unfolded quietly in the background. Christine Rodas's appeal. After losing in federal court, Christine attempted to revive her case in state court, but faced the same result: dismissal. Insurance litigation. Universal Pictures insurers reportedly paid Meadow $10.1 million in 2014 as part of a settlement acknowledging her father's lost earnings due to the halted Fast and Furious 7 production. Estate settlements. Meadow's attorneys also reached agreements with unnamed parties connected to the car's maintenance and storage, suggesting liability was spread among multiple defendants. While the lawsuits played out in court, another battle raged in the court of public opinion. Porsche's legal filings often made headlines for their blunt tone, including the statement that Paul was a knowledgeable user who knew the risks of high-performance vehicles. Fans saw these lines as insensitive, framing a beloved actor's death as the result of his own choices. Porsche, for its part, focused on protecting its brand from what it saw as unfounded accusations. Even though Porsche never admitted fault, the lawsuits uncovered and confirmed key facts. The Carrera GT had no stability control system, a rarity in 2014, but almost standard today. The car was marketed as a mere race car for the road, with driving demands far above typical street vehicles. Safety improvements like reinforced fuel tanks and modern restraint systems could have been fitted but weren't required by law at the time. Tire age and maintenance history played a significant role in expert evaluations of the crash. By the time the last lawsuit was closed, the official record still matched CHP's original conclusion. Unsafe speed caused the crash, not mechanical failure. But the settlements meant no jury ever weighed in on whether the Carrera GT's design made it more dangerous than necessary. For Meadow Walker, the legal fight secured financial stability and preserved her father's legacy from narratives she viewed as unfair. For Porsche, the conclusion meant avoiding a public ruling that could set precedent against high-performance automakers. Yet, in the eyes of many fans, the lawsuits only deepened the mystery. Was Paul Walker's death an unavoidable tragedy caused by a split-second driving error, or a preventable disaster rooted in design choices and corporate priorities?